Welcome, everyone. For those who are new and for those reoccurring listeners, we're so excited that you're here today. My name is Nancy Schwartz, and this podcast is entitled The Art of Healthy Retirement. And this podcast has two goals. One, to support those business experts who are transforming from a career to healthy retirement, and also to those business experts who have retired. And this is showcased on my YouTube channel. And the interview, we talk about how our guests are living or will be living their ideal retirement in health. And what I love, and today we have an incredible woman here, Laura Rotter, who I'm so excited, who is across the screen. No interview is the same, and each podcast that we do is educational in content, and we really want to offer inspiration to others by showcasing how our guests are living their life on their own terms. So welcome, Laura. I'm so excited that you're here today.
I'm excited to be here, Nancy.
Well, you're brightening up this rather foggy day. So this is all awesome. This is all awesome. So Laura, if I may introduce you, has quite a amazing career and now has another career going. So she has an MBA from Stern School at NYU, a CFA and a CFP. She really has had a stellar career on Wall Street, which I want her to talk to you about, and then created a new company. And Laura, I love the name, so I want to go into that as well, and really helping her clients have freedom using money as a tool. And I think that her story of how she developed this mindset will be very, very interesting, not only to me, but also to the listeners. So Laura, welcome, and thank you so much for being here. And I'd love to know how you got from NYU Stern to one of the top players on Wall Street. How did that happen?
I guess it's I grew up without a tremendous amount of financial security. I ended up in a convoluted way. I was an English literature major. And I graduated into a recession in the early 80s, so to give you a sense of my age. And my first position actually was working at an organization that published newsletters for various industries. I remember the beverage industry, the auto industry, and that over time, I ended up through an introduction. You know, we often get positions through our network. Right. So through an introduction, I think from my father, I ended up working for a small middle market bank. I spoke Hebrew, and the bank was Bank Leumi, and that's how I got the position. And I ended up in their credit training program, so learning to eventually be a loan officer working with small businesses. I don't know how I knew this, but I became very aware that the lending officers, even senior lending officers, were making at most, you know, mid 5 figures. It was a small bank, and if you were a lending officer, you were dealing with like the wives of the business owners who needed some checks. And I had read about Wall Street, and I thought, I'd like to earn some more money, and it seemed exciting. You know, I remember reading Investors Business Daily and just getting a sense of, seemed much more exciting than working for a small middle market bank. At the time, I think I just got married, and it allowed me, I was doing my MBA at night at Stern. And I realized it was going to take me forever to finish at night. And I think at the time, my husband was making $40,000, enough that I felt like, okay, I'm going to take a semester or two to work, to do my MBA full-time. And through that and applying at NYU Stern, I wanted to be an equity analyst. I wanted to do that. And I ended up getting a position with a mutual fund company, Oppenheimer Management, not on an equity fund, but on a high yield fund. And they said, you know what? High yield bonds very much can end up being like equity. And so I think like everybody's first job, you get a toehold in an industry. And I, over time, went from dealing with high yield, which are bonds of companies that don't get investment grade ratings. And so they yield more. You're taking a little bit more risk, you get more yield, to ultimately being a distressed debt analyst, which is companies that couldn't end up servicing their debt and so had to restructure. And when companies restructure, they often, because of how legally seniority works, they say, hi, bondholders, you now own the company. And so I often say that what my career was looking at equity in drag. So I was looking at bonds that were trading at 50 cents on the dollar, 60 cents on the dollar, and deciding, looking at it as stock, like, do I actually think this company can improve? It was really, really interesting work. I often look back on how I, an English major, was able to get her foot in the door. I don't think it became much more competitive in my professional lifetime, so that I remember looking at resumes, and if you didn't go to Harvard or Wharton, or we didn't even look at people like that. And I went to Stern at night, and I'm very grateful for the career that I had, and that for so long, until the last decade, let's say, it was tremendously interesting work. I often compare it to being an English major, because one of the reasons I chose that major was I was interested in history. I was interested in economics. And when you're reading, you're aware of the backdrop of when the book was written, et cetera. Well, I was a generalist. And so I was constantly looking at different industries and aware of what's going on politically that's affecting the industry, what's going on economically that's affecting the industry, getting to know management teams. It was really tremendously fascinating work. And though in the last decade, and now this is changing, but because the Federal Reserve had kept rates so low, people were chasing investments for better returns. And so I found it much less interesting. The kind of returns I was used to being able to demand from companies' investments weren't there, because if the risk-free rate is practically zero, then the returns you're getting from risky investments are relatively low. So it was fascinating work until it wasn't. And the industry itself shifted. I've said this many times. When I started about mid-'80s, it was all the nerds in high school that realized they could do intellectually challenging work and make money. And earning money, at least to me, was a byproduct, but not my driver. And by the end, it was attracting all the frat boys who said, oh, I have these relationships I could leverage to make money. And that became the driver, and it sort of self-selected for the kind of people that were just interested in more. And that, I find, is the enemy, the relentless pursuit of more and more. So I was in the industry for almost 30 years. I think I started in 1986, and I left at the end of 2013. So big part of my adult professional life.
Yeah, that's a beautiful story. I love that. And I love how the English major allowed you the bandwidth to really become a generalist, right? And to be able to have the interest in all these different aspects. Think of how many aspects in the finance that you were playing in, so that's very, very cool. I'd love to unpack this story that you say about when you really had that intellectual pursuit, right? Coming from as the English major, and then the byproduct is the money. And what do you think caused that market shift whereby it's more about the money than the interest?
I was just reading an article that somebody sent me, talking about it. Not that we should get into politics, but really the big change in the tax code from when Ronald Reagan was president. And I think in general, our culture has become so obsessed with massive wealth that really, as you know, you were a guest on my podcast, Nancy, when most people I interview, the level of wealth when we were younger, there wasn't the ostentatious wealth. There wasn't a sense that, we should be striving for mega mansions and flashy cars. It just, I don't know. I grew up, like I said, it wasn't a financially secure home. Yet I don't know that I was so aware of that. I have a memory of my father we grew up in a small rent-controlled apartment, a family of 4, 1 bathroom. I shared a bunk bed with my sister in the room that was meant to be the dining room. And yet I didn't have friends. If friends had houses, they were like attached row houses. I didn't have a level of wealth to compare it with. And I remember my father saying something like being afraid that I'd be embarrassed to bring friends home. And I didn't understand what he meant. Frankly, I also have a story that when I first met my husband, I thought, because when I worked for the middle market bank as a credit analyst, I was making, I think, $17,000. And I thought, if I could just earn 25 grand, I had no sense of money. Nobody ever talked about money. That's still true today. And I didn't, even when I did decide I wanted to go to Wall Street, I thought, and I suppose this is still a lot of money, but not in the context of Westchester County. Like, oh, if I could just earn $100,000, I just had no idea. And I think most of us didn't. It was a different time.
Yeah.
So I often think about, because there was, if I could go into a little detail of
Yeah, love it.
Some ways my career peaked in 1996. I was working for a hedge fund where that year, I started in 96. In 1997, I earned 7 figures. I was told that if I have another good year like this, I'd be given my own fund to run and I would be made partner. And unbelievably, I left soon thereafter. Why? For a hedge fund that was closer to my home, where my kids could come and visit me during lunch, and where I was expressly told that I would never be made partner. Looking back, I could come up with so many psychological reasons why I did that shift. On the surface, it was to be around I had, 3 kids under the age of 5 at that point. But I wasn't motivated by the money. Clearly made a decision away from money. Whether or not that was the right decision is a whole other discussion. But the money was not that meaningful to me. It was interesting work with people I enjoyed working with. And I do think that ultimately, to have a really, really successful career on Wall Street, you do need to be driven by the money. And that was never my driver once I had a level of financial security.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting what you talk about. And I think my experience also was very similar to yours, that while I knew my dad and I knew his friends, we never really talked about keeping up with the Joneses, right? It was very quiet. It was a very quiet thing. And I can remember what my dad's salary was. If I told you, you'd be horrified. But anyway, and he was quite successful. And I'm sure your people as well and your friends. But I remember the year that I made way more than my dad, thinking in my head, how is this humanly possible, right? Similar to you. So let's talk about that step away, right? So here you are, you're going to be given a fund, and yes, you have 3 small children, but what was the driving factor in terms of your thinking? Because you have a family, right, to support, and that to me just seems so incredibly brave what you did. How did you muster up the courage for that?
So you're asking about the 2013 shift and not the
Yes,
1997
yes,
shift.
yes.
I really attribute it to beginning mindfulness practices. I started to practice yoga, I believe it was the early 2000s. And I often say I grew up with just a deep personal faith that I married into a family that somehow convinced me that that was psychotic. And then I met a yoga teacher who used the word God when she taught class. She very much weaved spiritual teachings in with physical asana. And it started to dawn on me that I was choosing to be a victim of my life, because if I didn't make it clear in the synopsis, from the last decade of my career, so let's say from early 2000s to 2013, I didn't like the people I work with, and I didn't like their values, and I found the work not that interesting, because where I was used to maybe being able to invest for 25% return, now everybody was investing in the same things and maybe you'd get a 15% return. I mean, much more than the risk-free rate, but given the risks I was taking, it just didn't seem to compensate. It just wasn't interesting to me anymore. Then my husband would say, well, that's why they call it work. And you agreed that you'd be the primary breadwinner. And I was like, I didn't agree to anything. I used to like what I did and now I don't. And I started to realize that I wasn't going to get a do-over, that if I was basically spending my entire week waiting for the weekend, and to what I was doing in terms of my health, I remember I had a happy light at my desk, because I sat in a trading room that was within a trading floor that didn't have any windows. I would make myself a green smoothie in the morning, and I just I meditated on the train going into the city in the morning. I was trying to be as centered as possible, and yet I just wasn't happy. And actually told the story at an event I was at this morning that in November 2013, I had taken a day off to go to a day silent meditation retreat in the city. And when I came back to work, I thought, I want to call my boss into a meeting. I'm going to try to figure out how to do this, because I really want to try to address what I thought was dysfunctional in the group, that, when we have our morning meetings, we shouldn't sit staring at the screen with our backs to each other. We should face each other. And instead, I was called into his office, where he said it wasn't for cause, but Citigroup was laying off a large amount of their hedge fund group because of Dodd-Frank. Citi had to divest their equity stake, and I was given quite a generous severance package. And the story I've told is that, yeah, I was unhappy, and in that way, I was, this came as almost a rescue. Like, okay, I can leave and get paid for the next 10 months. And on the other hand, I ended up accidentally tripping down the stairs at my home, and I started just bawling uncontrollably. And my husband was there, and he said, but you should be happy. You've wanted this. And I said, but this was my identity for close to 30 years. Like, who am I now?
Mm.
And it's very disorienting when you leave a career, as you know, Nancy, that's definition and also gave me my sense of self-worth. I recognize now that I didn't intrinsically believe I was worthy, but the fact that I earned a lot of money and I had a title that seemed impressive, that as a nerdy kid growing up gave me a sense of pride that, frankly, I know in many ways I've spent the last couple of years trying to replace, and my spiritual practices have continued to say to me, you are intrinsically worthy, and you don't need external definitions of success to feel that worth and believe it.
That's such a beautiful message for so many people. As you know, and Laura, you and I have spoken about this on your podcast and other conversations that we've had, that there's such a attachment to not only the cash component, but I think even more overriding is this sense of identity, and it becomes really a driver. It's not fixed, it's driving us, right? And so the fact that there was a physical impact, you falling down the stairs, the fact that, I can tell you I was in free fall. I mean, there comes a point generally with most people, and you were unhappy. I certainly wanted to change, that there's a shift, right, within that. And I just want our audience to hear that you almost have to go through that experience to realize what you realized so beautifully, your intrinsic worth, that you don't necessarily need all these extra shiny new objects, if you will, that you are enough, right? But it's so hard, right? Why is that process so challenging for people?
I mean, Nancy, you're bringing up for me. I hope this isn't, our listeners don't find it morose, but it really, so when I left that position after 1997, it really stayed with me for a long time, because I never got a boss that gave me the rope to hang myself that hedge fund manager. And I sort of never regained that level of autonomy and responsibility. And so I questioned for many years, why did I leave? And one summer, and people, it was a very coveted position that I left. So a lot of people called me, asked me about it. Should they interview? Why'd I leave? And so I knew the person very well who took the position over. We were friendly. We ended up vacationing together in one August. I think it was around 2010 or 2011. We didn't plan it. We bumped into each other. He was taking tennis lessons with a pro with my husband and was joking the whole time. I replaced his, jokingly, I replaced his wife in this position, whatever. So that was August. He was diagnosed with a virulent form of cancer soon thereafter. I'm getting chills, and passed away before Christmas. And after that, I stopped coveting what other people had. I realized that life is short, and I'm bringing this up. It's coming up for me again because one of my clients just passed away unexpectedly this past weekend, the husband of the couple I work with. And life is short, and if we spend our entire lives waiting for that next thing, that next paycheck, that next title that will make us happy or make us feel successful or make us feel secure, it never comes that way. It has to come internally. And I think it's something we grapple with constantly. I say when I started my own business, which I did in 2016, I was the worst boss I ever had. You know, I had to be at my desk by 7 a.m. and striving. And that striving is hard to get rid of.
Yes.
We all, those of us who are listening to this podcast, I know you know it, it's part of who we are, what the messages we received from our culture, from our family. And so we can't blame ourselves for it, but just to recognize that as I sit here, I look out, I'm in this beautiful office where I look out at the trees, and each moment is precious, and not spend each moment waiting to get to the next one and the next one, because we don't know how many weeks we're blessed to have on this earth.
Yes, I think that was so beautifully put. Definitely. Laura, I want to go back a little bit, and then I want to go forward a little bit. I'm very curious how you even picked up the word yoga. How did you even get involved in that and or a mindful practice while on the train when you were in Wall Street? If you could tell us that story, because that's like two different worlds colliding, and particularly back then, right? Particularly back then as well, it wasn't as quote popular or commercialized. Yeah.
So actually, I was not an athlete growing up. I put on the 20 pounds that everyone does when you're a freshman in college. And when I came home, my father bought me a pair of running shoes, and I became a runner. So my entree into yoga was a friend of mine on Wall Street told me about Bikram yoga. So where you practice and you sweat, and the room's 104 degrees. And so that was how I was able to practice yoga, by it being pretty challenging and hot and sweaty. And then in my synagogue, they announced that there was going to be a woman teaching Jewish yoga. And I walked into the room, and there was people of all shapes and sizes. And I thought, I'm going to try this once, but this is so not going to be for me. Like, it's going to be slow. I'm not going to break a sweat. And like I said, I was surprised by how powerful the language used and the teachings that she imparted. Again, the yoga asana, the actual shapes you make with your body, they were, of course, part of it, but it was her teachings and her message that really struck me. So it's always interesting to me how I was able to do yoga, because I started as it being sort of a challenging yet athletic pursuit. And then mindfulness, the meditation, I remember a friend of mine saying that he had, this is, back when you bought cassette tapes, or he had CDs from John Kabat-Zinn. It's, a non-spiritual, but mindfulness meditation CD. So I think I had an iPod, you burn the song. Right. So I burned the CDs, and I remember being on a business trip, staying at a hotel in Santa Monica, and sitting on the bed and listening to a 5 or 10 minute guided meditation from John Kabat-Zinn. And that's how I started meditating. And it really became a part of my life. I actually did a meditation teacher training, and I do try as part of my routine. I say, like this morning, I had an 8:30 networking group, so I didn't do it, but I try to spend 20 minutes meditating each morning, and then another 5 minutes or so journaling, and then exercising. So I have a pretty robust morning centering routine, if you will, and it also includes walking my dog for an hour, so I get outside, which I do think is also important. Yes, for the circadian rhythm and many other things included. Yeah, and for those who are listening, thank you, Laura, for that. I really love that process that you went through
from hot to more, which is external, right, to more an internal type of yoga. I love that. For those who may not know John Cabot, then he is really an extraordinary teacher. And I just found, oddly, that you should bring his name up. I just found a beautiful meditation on YouTube, and it talks about a mountain, and he talks about equanimity. And I've never seen that one before, so you can all look it up. It's quite beautiful. I just bring it up that it's just quite moving in terms of that practice. So thank you for sharing that name, because it brought to mind that beautiful video that I saw.
Yeah.
So let's talk about this new company that you founded, and I'm passionate to know how you named your company, because I love the name. And tell us what you do for your avatar is mid-career professionals, and you're using money as a tool. So I'd love for you to describe everything you can for our audience in this new company.
I'd love to. So it's actually unbelievably not that new. I started it in 2016, so I'm finishing my 7th year, though it does still, being an entrepreneur still feels like a learning journey, and probably always will. I was aware of, for me to make the kind of financial change I made in my life and my husband's life, it was both a spiritual decision, as we discussed, but it was also a financial decision. I looked at our overhead, look at a household as a business. And I said, we got to sell the vacation home, and we've got to sell the 6,000 square foot home, because just the carrying costs are so high. You have an acre of land and 6,000 square feet to heat, and really realized that it was as much a financial decision to be able to make the decision as it was. And of course, recognizing that my kids at that point, I had paid for college and they were off the payroll. And so I thought, I want to help other people who may feel that they're stuck in, similar to me, feel like they're stuck in lives that are not fulfilling, but feel like they have no other choice because they don't know how to organize their finances to make the transition happen. And I also spent, again, a long part of my life working primarily with men. And actually, to digress quickly, I did a yoga teacher training in 2011, I think it was, after I had a little period of leaving Wall Street and then going back when I was asked by people to come back. And so during that period, I did a yoga teacher training. And I remember we had to teach yoga in order to graduate. And I was frankly more nervous about that than the interview I had that ultimately got me back into working for Citigroup. And I love the fact that all the women were nervous, but were willing to voice it. There was a sense of sharing vulnerability that I never got when I was in groups of men. And so I said, I really like working with women. I'd like to primarily work with professional women who are recognize that it's time for them to make a transition, perhaps to retirement, perhaps to entrepreneurship, perhaps to another job, and to help organize and clarify their finances the way I was able to do for myself. And true abundance, I'm sure I thought for a while of what should I name this, but it was, again, coming from a place that of course, everybody wants to grow their financial resources to have security and freedom, and that it's a means to a greater end, but it's not the end in and of itself. How can I make my money grow bigger and bigger and bigger? And so I wanted to be, as I think of it, creating a safe space for people to explore what makes them come alive, what gives their life meaning and value. And surreptitiously, because people come to me about their money, and I ask deeper questions. Questions like I wish people would have asked me, like, if you knew you had one life left to live, what would you change? And I think these are important questions, as I guess, just made clear to ask ourselves. So I remember when I named the business, a cousin of mine who's a dermatologist said, I don't know what you mean by true abundance. And I said, well, David, you're not my target market. So it was very brave, I feel, on some level, but I also felt like if I didn't do it now, I would never do it.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I think, yes, I personally think it's very brave, certainly because abundance, I don't really remember here. I was still working, but I don't really remember that term. And I was very attached to other, besides what I was doing in terms of the dancing world, et cetera. And I don't really, when did that term, I mean, you probably were really at the forefront of that thinking in terms of capturing that for your company. So I think that's so beautiful. And Laura, how do you define freedom and flexibility? I know each client is very, very different. But for yourself, when you were the beta test, right, to make the company. So how do you describe that to your clients if they have trouble understanding what is it that you mean by that?
That's an interesting question, Nancy, because what comes up for me is I think what I continue to learn is that I don't want to assume that what speaks to me is what speaks to everyone else. So for example, if freedom and flexibility is what I want my financial resources to give me, perhaps someone else is looking for security or the ability to help family. So I'm very attentive. One of the first questions I ask when I'm first meeting with someone to see if we'd be a good fit is, why is money important to you? And to really listen deeply, which means people often answer quickly, let's say freedom. Okay, well, what does freedom mean? Or was there a time that you felt that you had freedom? Or to try to have patience in uncovering what's beneath the quick one-word answer. And for me, unpacking freedom and flexibility personally is where I'm at in my journey, because as I alluded to, not surprisingly, as I look forward, as each week starts, I've got, my calendar is pretty busy, and I'm trying very much perhaps to ask myself, why am I programming so much into my week? Is it serving me? What's behind that need to be perpetually busy? What need is that filling for me? Again, I could go on and on. Is it a sense of importance because I'm busy? And just continue to question what really is serving me. And I don't have an answer yet. But
well, you'll come back when we'll have another podcast so you can tell us the answer. But what I would really love the audience to hear from Laura is that, she has a thriving new business, and I still call it new because it's every day there's something new with new clients, et cetera. But that you yourself are still exploring. So there's what I love and what I'm hearing and how I'm interpreting this, and Laura, correct me if I'm not on mark, but that you're still growing, you're still evolving, everything is expanding, and that's a passion. When I hear about retirement or next chapters or however you want to define that, I still haven't found the right word yet, Laura. So pipe in if you've found a better word. But that life is expanding until it isn't, right? So that to me is just so beautiful to hear from Laura about that. Can I shift? Would you like to respond, or can I shift gears, or?
Either one. I guess my quick response for people who are considering retirement is, or some form of reinvention is, I think it keeps us young, because we're always challenging ourselves and learning things. It doesn't have to be remunerative, but don't assume that you're just going to play golf or only play with the grandkids the entire time. That it's important to be learning new things and new skills and meeting new people and constantly, using your mind.
Yes, that's so beautifully put. Using your mind, absolutely. 150% in on that. More than 100%. Laura, there's a lot of things happening right now in the marketplace and in terms of the economy, and we're looking at a lot of businesses who are trimming their sales pretty aggressively, I think getting ready for, and maybe this slight dip in the market is going to be not so much, or maybe it's going to be a lot. But what are you seeing in terms of trends with your clients that you could speak to that are successful, and perhaps you've worked with clients that are successful in this sort of uncertain market, right? We don't know whether we're up, we're down, we're sideways. What are some advice that you could give for those who would be your perfect avatar? How do they navigate these waters? It's becoming more and more complex. There's a lot of things moving these markets today, and I, as an analyst, you certainly know that economic, political, company-wide, global marketplace.
I guess what I'd say is I'm a firm believer, especially after a 30-year career as an institutional investor, that individuals should not try to time the market. Frankly, I think professionals who believe they can time the market are fooling themselves. I recently reconnected with a friend of mine from the hedge fund industry. He trades, he used to be a day trader. And he's like, oh my God, Laura, you should get all of your clients out of the market. This was a couple of months ago. I'm sure we've rallied since then. I am a firm believer that after I get to know my client's situation, if they're retired, what kind of money they need to withdraw from their accounts each year, and then I set up a bond ladder with maturities of government. Now actually government debt is yielding quite a nice amount. With maturity, so that we know that that principal will be available when it's needed. I try to build it out as much as I can, while then having a diversified, low-cost equity portfolio for growth that won't need to be touched for at least, I define it as about 7 years. So hopefully we have a bond ladder to cover it. And the only time I change the investment profile is when my client's situation change. But otherwise, I just think it's all noise. I mean, I still subscribe to Barron's because, and of course the Wall Street Journal, but it's just interesting to me when I open the Barron's issue on the weekend that I have no interest in what the pundits are saying this one. I mean, nobody knows. Nobody has a clue. When I was an institutional investor, frankly, and that's why I thought distressed debt was quite interesting. I had never had an overall view of the market. I was always a bottoms
Mhm.
up investor, looking at an individual company and thinking whether or not their securities had value, and distressed debt in particular tend to be pretty event driven. You could
Right.
say, so it was a relatively short time horizon, thinking, that there'd be certain signposts that people would either wake up to a company's value or wake up to the fact that the company wasn't valuable. So I'm just not all that interested in trading based off of what's going on in the outside environment. And I do also have a philosophy of I don't reinvest dividends and interest income automatically. I let that accumulate so that I can make a decision that if the market's down and your equity exposure has gone down a bit, to reallocate to equity, or if the market's been rallying a lot, to reallocate towards fixed income on the margins. But again, I'm not a tactical trader. I don't believe in it. It's funny, I was in active management for, again, quite a long time. And I believe that if you're somehow skilled as an active manager, you will charge fees for that skill, and you will have the yachts and the McMansions and not your clients. So don't believe in it.
Sage advice from someone who's been there, done it, and still doing it. So that's wonderful. Thank you, Laura, for that. I really appreciate that. So if I was very interested in wanting to work with you, how do I find you? What is the best way to get a hold of you? Where do we go?
My website is True Abundance Advisors with an O at the end.com. On that website, you can schedule a call, or you can read more about me and my business. I do also have a money blocks worksheet that is available that you can download. And I also send out a weekly newsletter, which you can subscribe to on my website, where I meld a mindfulness teaching with a financial planning subject matter. So I enjoy writing that, and you can subscribe to it through the website.
Thank you. That sounds fabulous. I'd like to subscribe to that. I'm on some of your other lists, but that sounds fabulous. So thank you for that. Laura, final words in terms of anything that you'd like to say or share with the audience. Maybe it deals a little bit with health or wealth, depending on how you're feeling today.
I guess what's been top of mind for me recently is, as much as possible, I guess have a gratitude practice I'm going to end with, because I was going to say, as much as possible, be in the moment. And I think really having a practice of perhaps waking up in the morning and writing 3 things you're grateful for, or at the end of the day. And it doesn't have to be, big things. I somehow, from what someone once said to me, whenever I turn on the shower and hot water comes out, I'm so grateful for the ability to just have hot water whenever I want to. I'm grateful for meeting people like you, Nancy, and to just be aware of all the blessings we have in our lives, and less striving towards something we imagine will bring us greater happiness, because we can find the happiness we need right here.
Yes, I love that, Laura. So thank you so much for providing your time, your valuable wisdom, your experience, and certainly love this conversation that we've had. And I hope year over year we can have continued conversations like this. So Laura, thank you so very much, and wishing everybody a great day, and appreciate everyone who is listening. Thank you, and to your healthy retirement.